Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Power Up podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to impact and upgrade your everyday life. The question that I have for us all tonight is, anyone ever had the best of intentions and then failed to follow through those intentions, or done something that's the complete opposite of their intention? Why? How comes? How comes we can have the best of intentions and then our actions can fall short of those intentions?
Because we're human and we have temptations.
Okay, perfect.
We're human and we
have temptations.
We get sidetracked, we get distracted, we have temptations.
Anything else? What about like when we fall short? So we've heard so far temptations, we're human, distractions.
Also, just maybe you just like didn't assess the whole situation, and so you got surprised by things you didn't expect.
Okay. So what do we do about it? What we're going to do tonight is something a little bit different, and that is we're going to learn a little bit of a graphic Mishna. Okay. While you're reading it, I want you to kind of, if you've heard it before, pretend you've never heard it before, and I want you to also kind of think, like, why is it so graphic? Like, what's the purpose in the rabbi writing it in such a graphic thing? And then share with me any sort of thoughts or comments that come to mind.
Ivia Ben Mahalalel would say, reflect upon three things and you will not come to the hands of sin. Know where you came from, know where you are going, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting. From where you came, from a putrid drop, where you are going, to a place of dust, maggots, and worms, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. Wow.
Thoughts, comments. Let's start with the question of why do you think he did it? He put it in such graphic terms. We sometimes see this in the Talmud, right? In the Mishna or the Talmud, that the rabbis will write things. Either it's a story that doesn't seem to make much sense, or it's something like this where you read it and you're like, whoa, that was more than what I bargained for, right? What do you think is the purpose of writing in such a fashion? What does it do to us as the reader? It makes an impact, it scares us, it makes us think, right? You're not going to just kind of, like, imagine if you would have just stopped it at the first sentence, right? And before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting, right? It would have been impactful, but that's it. But you keep reading, and then, oh my goodness, you're like, this is like making me think, right?
Putrid and maggots and worms.
The point of it is that it's written in a way to make us stop and think about what it is, and also to remember it, right? Because it becomes more memorable now that you've kind of stopped and thought about it. Okay, so who was this Akavia ben Mahalalel? Besides for someone who has a difficult name to pronounce, right? Who was he? So I'll tell you an anecdote about him, a story about him. His son, the Talmud records that his son came to him and asked him, he said, can you introduce me to your friends, right? Because his friends were the rabbis, and his son wanted to sort of have a foot in the door. What do you think most parents would say? If a child is asking a parent to put a good word in for them in a professional situation, what would he say? Similar situation. Let's say the father's a doctor and the son is studying to be a doctor, and he says, can you put a good word in for me amongst all your friends? I think most parents would say, sure.
Yeah.
Akavia ben Mahalal's response was different. He said to him, your character is going to speak for you. Which basically, his response to him was, you have to be the type of person that is going to make an impact, in the world, right? Like, I can or I cannot vouch for you, but at the end of the day, the person that you are, your personality and who your character is going to make the biggest impact on where you're going to go in life, right? He was a person who had integrity. So he is going to tell us 3 questions, 3 reflections that we should ask ourselves. And this is going to stop us from what he says has come to the hand of sin, right? Which basically keeps us on the straight and narrow, right? It keeps us from doing what we need to do and really living in alignment with our higher self. So what are the 3 questions? And there are different levels that we can understand these 3 questions. There's the basic level, and then we're going to go into a few deeper questions. So what's the first question that we're supposed to ask ourselves?
Where you came from.
Why do you think the Mishna is starting with that, with our low, and it then goes further on to say from a putrid drop, right? Why do you think the Mishna is starting from our lowly beginnings?
To keep our egos in check.
Beautiful. So we can ask this question on ourselves, right? On our life story. We're coming from a putrid drop. That's where every single human being starts from. But there's also the question of we can ask on our soul level. What does it mean? Where are you coming from? Where is your soul coming from?
From God.
From God. Beautiful. Exactly, right? We can ask ourselves, we can remind ourselves that, hold on a second, I have a holy, divine soul that's godly. Now, imagine you're about to do something, whether it's, you're annoyed with someone and you're about to say something to them, and you take a moment, a pause for a moment, and you stop and you think to yourself, hold on a second, I have a holy soul. How's that going to impact what you're going to do?
It's going to make you think.
It'll keep us elevated. If we know that our soul comes from a holy place, then we will continue on that.
Yeah.
We sort of
Dimension.
aspire to a higher level.
Yeah. So we see how this sort of simple reflection question that we can ask ourselves helps us to act in a way that aligns with our higher self. There's a third way we can ask this question, and that is on the action itself, right? Because every action has an origin, right? What does that mean? It has a motivation. Something motivates us to do it. And it's very important to sometimes ask ourselves, what's motivating me to do this? Again, you're about to say something to someone, and you can ask yourself, why should I say that to them? And sometimes, your initial response can be, well, they deserve to know. But then if you actually pause and ask yourself, what's my motivation? Your motivation might be because I'm mad and I want to tell them what I think of them.
Yeah.
We can actually stop and think to ourselves, what is the motivation that's driving this thing that I'm about to do? And again, it helps us by keeping our motivation in check and see whether the motivation is a helpful motivation or an unhelpful motivation. Any thoughts or questions on the first reflection? Okay. So let's move on to the second question. What's the second question? Where are you going? Okay, so on the life level, what's the response? What's the response the Mishna gives us?
To dust, maggots, and worms.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what does that do when we sort of think of it in that?
For me, it's kind of like, well, this is my time to shine. It's like, this has an ending. So I may as well do what I can now.
Okay, beautiful. So how does knowing that there's an ending shift our priorities?
Hopefully you won't procrastinate as much.
Okay, beautiful.
If you know your time is limited and where you're going.
Right, make the best of every moment. Right. So on the basic level of our life, right, the fact that we know that we're here for a finite amount of time helps us shift our priorities in all the different ways that you kind of said. It helps us procrastinate less. It helps us do the right thing because we want to shine in this world. On the soul level, where is our soul going to? If we're asking that question of where you are going, where is our soul going? It's going to be returned to God. And how do we want it to return to God?
Pure.
Pure, and hopefully with more good than what we came into this world with, right? So again, if we can sort of reflect on that on a level of our life, but also on the level of our soul, and remind ourselves that our soul is going to return to God, and we want to return it to God with a life well lived. And again, that again helps us to ensure that the actions that we're going to take are going to align with our higher selves.
I think also,
Yeah.
if you focus on the soul, then the material world shouldn't be quite as important because it's going to turn into dust, maggots, and worms. But it's the soul that's
All that
important.
stuff we have.
Yeah, it's true. And sometimes we invest so much energy in the stuff that we have, right? And collecting the stuff that we have, and making sure the stuff that we have is, up to a certain standard, etc. And when we remember that we're a soul living in this world, then it can help us put it into perspective. Yeah. The third way we can sort of ask this question is on the action itself. What does it mean when we ask the question of where is this action going?
I mean, is it going to lead us towards our goals or away from our goals?
Every action has a consequence, right? Sometimes they're intended and sometimes they're unintended. It's interesting because is anyone here familiar with organization Momentum? So it's an organization led by Lori Palatnik. So she started this organization which takes women to Israel, and it's kind of like Birthright for Mums, she calls it. And someone was talking to me about it today, and they were mentioning like different consequences of the program. They've taken thousands of women to Israel, and she said one of the unintended consequences of that program was how it empowered women leadership, right? Especially like Rebbetzins of communities, etc. And I just thought it was fascinating because every action that we do has a consequence. And we don't always think about the consequence that it's going to be, but when we actually stop for a moment and think to ourselves, what is going to be the consequence of this action, right? Where is this action taking me to? Is it taking me to a place where I want to go? And then I should go ahead with it? Or is it taking me to a place where I don't want to go? And maybe then it's better not to do it. So that's a different way that we can sort of ask that question, is looking at the action itself and kind of thinking to ourselves, okay, where is this taking me to? Hopefully thinking about that, if action would be a better course, can spur us into taking action. All right, let's move on to the third one, right? What is the third reflection? The third question from the Mishna, right, is before whom am I going to have to give an accounting to? Just out of curiosity, how does the accountability that we have with God differ from judgment from people?
It lessens the pressure.
Tell me more about that.
Well, if you're focused on, what's Hashem gonna think when, I'm on my way up there, then in terms of the judgments, the social judgments, their importance drops.
Right, because we're not so worried about what other people. Yeah, I hear that, definitely. Jenny, what are you going to say?
I don't know, I think accountability is just so different than judgment. And human judgment is like open for interpretation. Like one human can have one judgment and another human can have a different judgment. But I think your accountability is so kind of pure, or it's just like straight line. There is no room for interpretation. Did I say that clearly?
I think so. Yes. I mean, also part of that is that as human beings, we only see a part of the picture, right? We don't really know what's going on with other people. Whereas with God, God sees the whole picture. So God's accountability of us is very different than a human being judging us.
Well, plus social pressure can be pressure to do something negative.
Yeah. It could be a negative pressure for sure. Sometimes
Often it is.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times it is. And I also think like we have to differentiate, like why does God hold us accountable? Why does God hold us accountable?
To elevate us.
To bring out the best in us. Why do people judge us? A lot of times it's
insecurity.
A lot of times it's their own insecurities, it's their own stuff, right? That's going on that's making them judge other people. Whereas with Hashem, when he holds us accountable, it's because he's kind of saying, I know you have a soul that can accomplish great things, and I want that perfection for you. I want that goodness from you. So I'm going to hold you accountable so you can achieve that. That's coming more from a much more loving place than it is coming from when other people are just judging because they see a part of the picture, right? So when we talk about God's accountability, it's important to kind of recognize where it's coming from. How does thinking about God's accountability impact us when we're living our life?
It reminds me that I have good inside me.
Yeah. So that's the first level of thinking about it, is just pausing and thinking, okay, I'm going to have to give accountability for what I'm about to do at some point, right? How do I feel about that? The second thing, the second level, which we spoke about, is like that soul, is to think about the fact that our soul is divine, comes from God. We're going to return it to God, and we're going to have to give accountability, which, if you think about what that means, God is overseeing the whole world, and yet he cares about every little thing that you and I are doing. What does that mean? That God cares about every little thing. Like, what does that mean about us as people?
That God loves us.
That God loves us, that we're important, we're valuable, right? You're walking on the streets and there's ants on the ground. Do you stop and notice what they're doing?
No,
No. Why?
because they're insignificant.
They're irrelevant. We don't really care.
Well, my husband should have looked at the ant in Texas because the red ants bit him and he suffered for months.
But did you see what you did right there? Is why he should have done is because the ant did something that was significant
Right.
to you, right? Which shows us that if God takes care of, if God notices and watches every single thing that we do, that means that every single thing we do is significant. Which is incredible if you think about it. Like, there's billions of people in the world, and I'm like an ant to God, and yet every single thing that I do, God cares about and takes notice of. So that's another way where we can kind of think about this question and kind of really remind ourselves of the importance of what we're about to do. And then the final level is on the action itself, right? To just think about, I'm going to have to give accounting for what I'm about to do. How do I feel about it? Right? So there's these three reflections, three questions that we can sort of ask ourselves to kind of help us live in alignment with where we want to go. There's, where am I coming from? Where am I going? And who am I going to have to give an accounting for? And it works on that level of our life, on the level of our soul, and the level of the action itself.
I think that's where kind of I was going. Maybe it sparked kind of that same thought, but if you have to like explain yourself at the end of the day, like you can't stand in front of somebody and just totally lie. Like you can, but like you would know if I'm completely lying to you.
From what we're told about our accountability with Hashem, it is kind of like if Jenny's wearing the red sweatshirt and she tells us she's wearing a green sweatshirt, right? Like it's so obvious. So
You become what?
transparent, right?
God can see through anything.
We're told that our soul is going to testify on our behalf, right? Like there isn't lying in the
No.
world to come.
No.
This is the world of lies and deceit. The world to come is the world of truth. So there isn't anything, and that truth, is it painful or pleasurable? Well, it depends. It depends on how we lived our life, right? If we lived a life that we're proud of, then it's pleasurable. If we lived a life that we're not so proud of, then that.
Or if you lived a life maybe you're not so proud of, but then you worked on repairing it.
Then that's very pleasurable, right? Because that's something to be proud of. It's very hard to repair. One more thing to bear in mind as we're kind of talking about these three reflections is that just like there's a physical ecosystem in the world, right? And I think, it's something that we are more aware of nowadays than we were, let's say, years ago. Years ago, there was a certain species of a bug that they became extinct in a certain ecosystem, right? And no one really cared about it at the time because they thought, it's just a small, insignificant bug. And what did they discover?
But the bug is connected to other things, so it had a bigger impact than you would think.
Yeah, the bug is connected to other things, and it taking that bug out or introducing a new bug into the system changes the entire physical ecosystem, right? You may not understand what that bug is connected to. You may not understand why it's significant at all, but we're now at the point that we know that every part of the ecosystem is significant for the ecosystem. Likewise, there's a spiritual ecosystem as well. And there are some mitzvahs that we can look at and we know how it's part of the ecosystem. We know, for example, telling lies disrupts society, right? It weakens trust and the goodwill between people, etc. We know that. And there are other mitzvahs that we don't know. For example, there's a mitzvah of shatnez, which means that you're not allowed to wear a garment of clothing that has both wool and linen in it. Do we understand why that's significant? No, I don't think any of us necessarily understand it. Yet there's a spiritual ecosystem that every mitzvah impacts the ecosystem. And that's something else that we have to bear in mind when we're about to do a mitzvah or we're about to do a sin, something that's not good. We have to reflect on the fact that what we're going to do doesn't just impact this thing right now, but it's going to impact the whole ecosystem, the whole spiritual ecosystem. And we don't know exactly how it works, but we do know what is good for the spiritual ecosystem, and we do know what's bad for the spiritual ecosystem, right? The mitzvahs are good for the ecosystem, and the Averos are things that we shouldn't do because doing them would be bad for the ecosystem. And that's another way where we can kind of use these three questions of where am I coming from, where am I going, and whom am I going to give an accounting for, to reflect on the actions that we're going to do, and remember that the actions that we're going to do have an impact not just on me right now and not just on this mitzvah right now, but on my whole ecosystem and the whole society's ecosystem. I'll share with you a little anecdote that I think highlights this. It used to be back in New York City, right, that in apartment buildings, the way it worked was that in the beginning of the day, a bakery would drop off, someone who works for the bakery would drop off a box of donuts and a little box next to it. And how did it work? That people would take a donut, drop the dollar, however much it costs, into the box, and at the end of the day, the baker would come by, whoever he hired to do it would come by, pick up the empty box of donuts or the leftovers or whatever, and the money. Anyone's been to New York recently? Apparently, it's not the way it's done anymore, right? Why? Yeah, why?
Because people are not trustworthy.
How did it go from a society where it was, of course, if I leave my box of donuts here, let's say the 12 donuts and there's a dollar a donut, right? Of course, I'm going to get $12 at the end of the day, to like, are you kidding me? If you want a donut, you come to my store and you pay me first before I give you one.
Right.
It doesn't go from being, honest to being completely dishonest just overnight. What probably happened was someone once wanted a donut, reached into his pocket, realized he didn't have a dollar, took the donut, and thought, you know what, I'll pay tomorrow. And maybe he paid tomorrow, maybe he didn't pay the next day, right? But what happens is that there's a little sensitivity that's lost. There's a little sensitivity that, of course, I'm not going to take something that's not mine, even though if I intend to pay for it later, I'll take it and then I'll pay. And maybe I forgot to pay, and then, oh, it's a shame I forgot to pay. But that sensitivity creeps into society till it comes a point where they even look up the newspapers, right? You have to pay for everything before you do it, because slowly, bit by bit, that sensitivity gets lost, and it changes that whole spiritual ecosystem. It changes the whole fabric of society from being the society where, I can leave my box of donuts here. I trust that I'm going to get, the money at the end. So like, are you kidding me? Like, who does that? Any thoughts, any questions, any comments?
Well, I mean, when you put the scenario, there's places in Israel that can do that with the donuts.
Right. When we went to vacation in the Isle of Man a few years ago, many years ago actually, which is a small village in Scotland. And we rented kind of like an Airbnb. And we asked the owner, how are we going to get in? So he says, don't worry, I'll leave the key in the door, right?
Yeah,
There
right.
are still
Yeah.
pockets.
Right.
And it was fascinating because we our mistake, but we did a barbecue and we didn't put the barbecue out properly. And the bin caught on fire, right? So what happened was we called the fire brigade out, and the person who came to answer the call called the owner of the house, and the owner of the house got in touch with us, and we could see how like the whole society there is different, right? Everyone looks out for each other. No one's going to take something that doesn't belong to them, right? And it's just, we think of it as it's a small thing, right? Okay, I do lock my door, I don't lock my door, but it's a massive thing,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
If you think about it, we
Yeah.
live in a society where it's not okay to leave your front door open, which is, that should be crazy. But for us, it's crazy to think that there are places where you can leave your key in your front door.
Yeah.
And it happens bit by bit by bit, right? Small sensitivities that get lost. And I think it's something worthwhile bearing in mind when we kind of think about what we're going to do and make sure that what we're going to do is going to propel us and society closer to where we want it to go. We think of society as this great unchanging thing, but it's actually not. It's very much changing, and we do have an impact on it, right? Our actions, for better or for worse, have an impact on it. Obviously, we have to be smart. We have to live within the society that we're living in, right? We have to lock our front doors, and we have to, have security or whatever it is. And at the same time, we won't always realize that how we live our lives is going to have an impact on ourselves, on the people around us, and on society at a level, as kind of Alina kind of said, that it changes for the good as well. These 3 questions also keep us humble, right? Because when we think of ourselves as even if we're thinking on a soul level, right, like the potential that we have and the potential that we want to actualize in our life, and right, but all these 3 things kind of help us develop ourselves, develop our lives, and at the same time remain humble. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy, and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Avos. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.